Fashion Tech Applied is published. My co-authored book taking you through 6 chapters and covering the technologies and innovations powering the fashion industry. I'm Peter John Ho Sang, founder and CEO of Beyond Form, and welcome to the special podcast series Applied. Each episode, I'll be sitting down with incredible fashion tech professionals that are featured inside the book. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with John Lau, Dean of Academic Strategy at London College of Fashion, and a gentleman that I've known for a very long time, even before I stepped foot into the doors of the university as a student. Fashion education is something that we like to place a lens on at Beyond Form, especially when thinking about the next generation of fashion leaders and essentially how they're going to be the new guard equipped with the relevant skills. John is featured in chapter 2 of the book, and in today's conversation, we discuss how one can stay relevant in the fashion industry.
Sometimes you do have to repot or replant and move on. And that part of that is learning new skills. And I think it's really important that we are always updating our tech skills. It's not to say that you have to be proficient, even an expert in all of the tech skills, but actually having an appreciation and understanding how it works. It's easier for you to work so that you can have that conversation with them.
Let's get to the conversation with John on this episode of Venturing into Fashion Tech. How are you today, John?
Very well, thank you.
That's good to hear. Again, and I am now reminiscing about my London College of Fashion days through the virtual medium. For those of our regular listeners, I was at the Stratford campus with Matthew Drinkwater in our previous episode, and now I'm joining John Lau virtually, who is the Dean of Academic Strategy at LCF. You and I go way back, don't we, John?
Yes, we do. Let's not give our age away, but yes, we go quite far back.
Let's not give our age away. Nobody wants to hear our ages. Just a very long time.
Yes.
Before I even started university.
It was.
The London College of Fashion. That's how long we've known each other. You have obviously been on a very long journey through the fashion industry, shall we say, and we're going to get some of those insights today through this episode, not just in academia, but also through your commercial work that you've done previously as well around the world. But of course, you now are in academia. And just to set the scene for our listeners, the global fashion education market is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 7.7% during 2022 to 29, and that's according to Data Library Research. So apparently, the fashion education space is growing. I know that, John, you at LCF are bursting at the seams with students. Post-pandemic, it seems that people are wanting to come to London to study at LCF and come to one of the fashion capitals of the world. Luckily enough, now, as our listener will have seen in our previous episode with Matthew, LCF New Stratford campus that opened in 2023. So congratulations for that, by the way, John.
Thank you.
It's the first time in its history that it's bringing together 6,500 students. That's a huge amount that will see through its doors. And in terms of staff members, that's going to be around 1,000 staff members across all of these floors in the building. For those of you that are not looking through the video version of this, our listeners, John is currently sat within a concrete box, very industrial as a meeting room, shall we say. But it is a beautiful building. In 2022, the London College of Fashion was ranked #1 fashion school in the world by CEO World. So again, congratulations, John. I'm sure you and your team worked very hard to make that happen.
They certainly did, yes.
A high accolade that also means high standards that need to be maintained. And that is very much your role, ensuring that LCF remains at the top of its game with its reputation, its prestige, and most importantly, making students get the education that they require to come out with the skills that they need. LCF continually does this by introducing new forward-thinking programs such as the MSc Fashion Analytics and Forecasting Program, departments such as the Digital Learning Lab, and ancillary teams such as the Fashion Innovation Agency that we've heard previously with Matthew Drinkwater, that are all brought together to enrich the fashion education ecosystem, not just in London, but LCF does a lot of work around the world as well. But before we get stuck into all of that, you, John, you are deeply ingrained into the fashion education system, but that wasn't necessarily where you started. As I alluded to at the start, you were also doing commercial work within the industry as well. And I remember us talking about some of the challenges working within production out in China. And I know that you have very rich and colorful stories around that. So I want to know, tell our listeners about your journey from LCF as a student. So you actually studied there as well. You did some work in the industry, you left the college, and now you're back as a member of staff. So everything in between. How did you get there?
Wow, I mean, it's been a very interesting journey, and I've loved my fashion career. And I still consider this a fashion career. It's just within a different context of fashion. I actually started my fashion career even before coming to LCF. I was this, kind of geeky 14-year-old who picked up a copy of Vogue in the 90s. I won't tell you which which edition it was, but I just picked it up and I thought, wow, this is amazing. Looking at the incredible workmanship that went behind the couture pieces, the haute couture pieces. It was, and I just thought it was absolutely incredible. And I was fascinated. That was it. I was fascinated, and I remember going to college and spending some of my time working in a factory in Manchester making corporate wear. It was just a fascinating process. And from that point on, I was hooked, and I wanted to make a career out of it. And I'd never really planned, where I would land. I mean, never knew I would ever be in this position. I'm in quite a privileged position at the College of Fashion, and indeed the fashion world. And I don't take that position. I don't take this lightly. Coming to London College of Fashion from a small town in the northwest of England, it completely opened my eyes to the possibilities of the fashion industry and mixing with people that understood everything that is about fashion. And that's what we're known for. When I graduated, I worked as a women's wear designer, just briefly worked as a women's wear designer, but it was through that I actually found my passion for styling, for magazines and magazine editing, and I moved into that space. And what was interesting was my skills were needed, or my fashion design skills were needed, because I was able to talk about clothes. I understood how clothing worked and how accessories worked. So how, how that was really helpful for me to put fashion pages together. And I found it absolutely fascinating. It was a completely new process for me. But then moving on, I did that in London. Then I also worked with a photographer in New York, and I was styling for photo shoots in New York, which again, that was a real culture shock to me, because it was so much more business-like to be styling in New York, and then so much about pace, about looking at the audience, understanding the audience. Because in London, you have much more freedom to do what you wanted to do creatively. Of course, understanding your readers, but in America, wow, it was a completely open. It opened my eyes to really looking at your customer, understanding your customer, and working with them. So that was incredibly fascinating. And when I moved to Hong Kong, I briefly moved back into designing for a license. We had the license for an Italian luxury brand specifically for the Chinese market. And it was then that kind of snowballed me working in production management. And the first day I walked back into the factory, it felt like I was that 16-year-old being absolutely fascinated by all of the machines. And at that time, production was still very much hands-on manufacturing skills. That it didn't have as much tech then as it does now. It was there that I realized that I needed to build on my skills. I felt like I needed to build on my business skills. So I came back to the UK and did my master's degree about 10 years ago. I moved to LCF as the program director of fashion, overseeing the management and leadership of the fashion program, which included menswear, women's wear, BA courses, also fashion jewelry. And that was an exciting time for me, because it was a real change in that I moved away from the actual teaching. Moving away from that was quite fascinating. I was now overseeing much more than just a single course or single unit or module. I was overseeing so much. I kind of overseeing all of that, and I became about 2 years later, I was promoted to the associate dean for the School of Design Technology. So then I had a very different vantage point of the school, and myself and the dean had started around the same time. She started in January. I was promoted to the associate dean in February, and we pushed a lot of change in the school. We pushed for sustainability, the introduction of sustainability in school, wanting to ensure that every student left with the underpinning and that ground-based knowledge of what sustainability means and how to incorporate that in their work so that they can leave and graduate and leave us, to become better designers, better makers with that sustainability knowledge. And just before she left, and just before I moved into this new role, we introduced this profession, and it was fascinating to see because we knew, again, we could see on the horizon that this is becoming so important to us. This was, before the pandemic, before everybody was forced to become digital. Our history is 117, almost 118 years old, and it started off with the merging of two colleges, two trade schools, in fact, for girls. And that's how London College of Fashion was born. And I'm now part of that history where I can rewrite, I can write that new future for it. And it's exciting. It's a real privilege. It's a real privilege to be here.
I can just envision now younger John sat in his bedroom with a copy of Vogue, envisioning his career in the fashion industry. It sounds like you've seen quite a lot from, Western fashion right through to the other side of the world out in Hong Kong there. You mentioned in your story there that London is very much about creativity and freedom. There's a heavier business side on the American market. Do you think that's still true in today's kind of like fashion system?
I mean, the system has shifted so much in terms of really the consumer market exploded in China. I mean, when I first started out in the industry, China didn't even feature on the map as a location for luxury fashion. Of course, luxury fashion existed there. It was, more localized. There were people who were traveling to Europe or to North America consuming fashion, but in terms of access, local access, it wasn't available to them. So they had to travel. They had to go elsewhere to kind of feed that. But then when I would say, kind of mid to early to mid 2000s, that's when Western brands took notice that there's this massive burgeoning market, and that market were becoming much more wealthier. They were able to afford things. They were able to kind of indulge themselves, and quite rightly able to indulge themselves in products that had never been made available for them before. And it was fantastic to see that.
Are there any like nightmare stories that you can share? I mean, I think it's very interesting there how you say that in the past, China, Hong Kong wasn't necessarily seen as a luxury market. Of course, now it's such a key market for all of the luxury players around the world. How does that make you feel? For the viewers, for the listeners that can't obviously see the screen, John is of Chinese origins. How does that make you feel as somebody coming from that part of the world?
I mean, I think it's fantastic. I think it's I feel like it's always been overlooked and it's always been dismissed. And, we as a culture has been very much misunderstood. And, there is a quite clear distinction though, in terms of the Hong Kong, what was the Hong Kong market and the rest of the China when I first started out, when I first moved to Hong Kong. And the factory was based in China, so I had to travel across the border into China. Hong Kong was different because it was in a much more, I would say, it was in a position that had links to the West. Obviously, it was a colony of the UK. So luxury fashion brands had already existed, but that wasn't made as readily made available to those in China. It's just been very much misunderstood. Yeah, I used to go into luxury stores. They were really excited. Yeah, when I was younger, they were really excited. They thought, "Oh, you're Japanese, you must have money." But when they learned that I was Chinese, they didn't bother. They think, "Oh, you're not going to spend anything," and they were always on the watch. They were always on the lookout, thinking, "I don't know." They probably thought I was going to steal their ideas and copy their ideas. I'm probably won't be the first person to say that, or a designer of my generation to say that, unfortunately. But then, within a couple of short years, it was a very different game. A very different game. There was an acknowledgement, and there's also a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more respect now for the Chinese consumer, and that is because of the way that fashion has kind of ingrained into the kind of psyche of the Chinese population. Not only are they consumers, but they're also the manufacturers. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had when I was 16 in the factory making corporate wear. And they said, "Oh, we make jackets." I said, "Yes, I can see that. That's the only thing that you can make." I said, "Well, what about the trousers? What about the skirts?" And they said, "Oh, we make that in China because that's their skill level. That's the only thing that they can make." That factory doesn't exist anymore in the UK. And that's because the skill level that they had in China, it just increased warp speed. They were able to learn quickly, learn what luxury fashion is. It's like being able to manufacture luxury fashion has meant that I think that the local population really understand the product, and not just look at it from the lens of, kind of had a marketing lens. They're able to understand and really appreciate the product itself. And I find that's really fascinating.
I think it's very interesting there, how fashion in some ways has broken down quite a lot of those borders that you were mentioning there. For those of you that have never actually been to Hong Kong, where also my family is from as well, it's kind of interesting because you do arrive in Hong Kong, you don't need a visa, especially if you have a UK passport, but then to cross the border into Shenzhen, for example, you need a visa to get there. And I think that just tells you so much about how the system is set up, and also how, in some ways, you mentioned that Hong Kong was a colony of the UK and how it did link everything together with Western fashion. But now it has broken down in some ways. When we're thinking about the London College of Fashion, a huge part of the student population is made up of international students, especially coming from East as well. So it is a key part of the fashion education ecosystem, especially at LCF. And of course, as I mentioned right at the start, they're coming because the London College of Fashion does have a reputation being ranked number one. It certainly was for me when I was choosing which university to go to. That was one of the draws as well. It had a very strong reputation back then. You're featured in chapter 2 of the book Fashion Tech Applied, where we do talk about the next evolution of design. I'm just going to quote you from the book, and actually it's featured as an interview. They're looking for specialisms, and companies are not just looking for a fashion designer. So we're referring to here fashion companies recruiting graduates. They're looking for specific skills and competent tech operators across a variety of hardware and software. So for the LCF, what does it mean, I guess for you as well, John, what does it mean to be a fashion student in 2024, and how does tech and innovation play into that?
First thing I have to say is that any fashion student, and I still consider myself a fashion student, I'm sure you do too, there's so much to learn and never stop learning. Because the industry is known to change. We change every season at the very least. But we have to learn with the developments that are happening in the industry. And what is very evident now is those things. Some things that are happening kind of adjacent to the industry. New tech, new software, and it's actually going to make an impact of what's going to happen in the fashion industry itself. Because we talk a lot about using technologies such as Close 3D. I came from somewhere. That came from understand. I came from that kind of traditional looking at digital pattern cutting, but they've taken inspiration from CGI, I think, from Hollywood, and I think that kind of merging of this tech is going to lead the way. We have to work with that, and the students will need to carry on learning. What we teach them is just the start, and I want them to realize and want them to understand that this is just the start of your career. It's not that I'm not going to teach you everything that will last you until the day that you retire. Absolutely not. And I mean that would be terribly boring.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you that I don't think you can ever stop learning in fashion. There's just so much to learn all the time. It is a massive and huge industry. I always remember, though, my first day on campus, when I set foot on that campus, it did kind of give me chills almost for our listeners, just for context. John and I come from the same part of the world in the UK, and as John alluded to, coming from a small town to a very huge, the capital of the UK is a huge deal to go to fashion school, and it always gives me chills to go back to that moment. Back then, it was John Prince's Street off Oxford Street, so Oxford Circus. That was the previous building, and you could just get this buzz and the energy. I don't know if you remember the first day you ever set foot on campus.
Yeah. I mean, my first day on campus, I remember walking in and thinking, this, I didn't know anybody. I didn't go with friends. And I walked in and thought, gosh, this really just feel like home. This feels like it's like something that belongs to me. And it's a feeling that I've never shaken off. And even when I returned in 31st of March 2014, I walked into the building and I got exactly the same feeling. And that feeling was that people understood me. I understood what they were doing. We are all striving towards that that kind of unknown. We're all working on something that's going to be that potentially has a massive impact across the industry, the world, whatever you want to call it. It has that massive impact, and
But in some ways, moving to the new Stratford building, especially as you said, LCF has been around for more than 100 years. You, as the current generation of fashion education leaders, it's almost starting again, but now you have a blank slate, a very big blank slate with this massive building
very, very bad. Yeah, very
to
big.
be able to shape it as you want. And when I was there visiting Matthew Drinkwater, as I said previously, the head of the Fashion Innovation Agency, LCF, you do get that sense of, wow, this is it is being molded, but also has a legacy at the same time, which I think is a very interesting mix of all of that. Matthew mentions, with his team at AFA, they're sat in between commercial and academia. They are very front external facing. I want to get your point of view though, John, working on the academic side of things. How do you see fashion tech, and how does the work at FAA kind of reflect in the curriculum that you're building out?
I mean, the Fashion Innovation Agency is very much the LCF gateway to the external. We do all these external projects in the FIA that I think are very, very exciting. I think Matthew Drinkwater brings in a huge amount of technology, but also experience and knowledge to fashion tech. And that is for us a really great example of the possibilities of what fashion can do. And in terms of what it does to the curriculum, it's certainly something that we would reference. We can't introduce all of that at massive scale all in one go because what Matthew does is quite unique. There's a lot of research and development. Some parts of his work is quite embryonic, so introducing that into all of our curriculum will be difficult. But that for us is a huge gateway to tap in that kind of inspiration around fashion tech. And certainly, we have partnered with, the academic side has partnered with the FIA on lots of different projects. And that in itself has then inspired us to introduce more tech into our curriculum.
Fashion is notoriously difficult as an industry to break into, but most importantly, to stay in that industry. There's a very high turnover in the industry itself. Many of my friends have come in and out of the industry. They didn't even try because they find it so difficult to enter it. All of it is about networking and who you know. So for these graduates or even individuals that are already working in the industry, how should they stay competitive from a skill set perspective?
Make sure you market your skills. That's the first thing. Everybody has skills. Ensure that you take the time to do a skills audit and really think about what are the most marketable parts of yourself. You could be a freelancer, or you could be applying for jobs, and you always need to do that. I do that quite regularly too. I look at what I've done over the year, and I take stock of where I've grown. So it's important to kind of chart that growth. It's very easy to kind of go through and I just think that, oh yeah, I'll remember. But take considered steps to chart that growth. Chart where you've come, where you started to where you've come to. And it's really important that you do that. I think it's important for everybody to do that. I think it's then considering the competitiveness of the industry. That's never going to go away. And it's not just in the fashion industry too. So don't think that you're entering an industry that is particularly difficult. I think most industries are also the same too, especially bigger ones. But in terms of making yourself competitive, we live in this society where there's sort of no appreciation for those for working at a job and staying in a job and staying there for a very long time. Sometimes you do have to repot or replant and move on. And that part of that is learning new skills. And especially now when we're working in a much more digital environment, I think it's really important that we are always updating our tech skills. And it's not to say that you have to be proficient, even an expert in all of the tech skills, but actually having an appreciation and understanding how it works will make it easier for you to work in teams that understand those tech, that are using that tech skills to do, for example, do pattern, digitizing patterns, digitizing embroidery, or doing digital prints, for example, so that you can have that conversation with them. So if it's not specifically your area, that's okay. You're not going to be proficient in everything. But understanding that and appreciating that really said you are much better, you stand a much better chance of working with a much bigger team that can make you much more creative. And it's not just in fashion design too. There's in our fashion business school, you mentioned the fashion analytics and forecasting. Understanding data is increasingly important in the fashion industry. And there are some brands that use it incredibly well. I think Inditex, for example, have very much cornered that as the high street market that relies a lot on using data to help them design, to help them be more sustainable. And that takes a huge amount of investment, but it also takes a huge amount of investment in ensuring that the team, that their existing team, has that right staff development, has that continual professional development that can take them to that next level. So a brand a retailer is doing. We're currently working on a quite a big project with our partners in Turkey, and it's to support them with the digital transformation of the apparel sector in Turkey. And I'm their principal investigator. I work with a team of experts that can help deliver training in digital technology to trainers and to small and medium enterprises in Turkey so that we can upskill their force, upskill their workforce. Because in Turkey, they've noticed that they still rely very much on the traditional manufacturing skills. They know that they need to transform. So that's why they brought us in, because we have that key expertise. And for me, that's absolutely fascinating to be able to support them with that transformation, because I'm learning so much. I'm learning so much in terms of what's happening in the fashion sector in Turkey, and their key role in supplying the world, both Asia. Yeah, they're in that strategic location where they can supply both Asia and Western Europe and North America.
I like how you said at the start of your answer there, a very actionable recommendation is to do a skills audit. We actually do talk about this in chapter 1 of the book. Just as a side note to our listeners, I did not pay John to say that. It was just a coincidence. But yes, if you want to get into the specialism of fashion tech, I think doing a skills audit is probably the first port of call. Seeing where are those gaps, but also what new software or new technologies can you learn to ensure that you can almost sidestep or create a new pathway for your career in the industry itself. And as you're saying, John, you're continuously learning as well through the projects that you're doing at LCF. I just wanted to finish off this episode with a quick fire round of questions. So the first answer that comes to your head, are you ready?
I am ready. Yes, go ahead.
Have you read Fashion Tech Applied yet?
I am reading it. So yes, I'm finding it absolutely fascinating. I just love how, in a way you are both letting us know what is happening in the future, but also a real good critique of what has come before. I mean, I find it really fascinating. So thanks for writing such an amazing book.
You're very much welcome, John. You're enjoying reading it. But I also think you say the keyword there, critique. And I think with many people in the innovation field or technology field, they're always singing the amazes of new technologies, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And I think we also need to reflect on those moments as well, as with anything within fashion,
Absolutely. And I think all tech needs critiquing, because that's how you innovate. Things I've seen technology become obsolete because they haven't been able to critique themselves, so they haven't kept up, and it becomes obsolete. So you're certainly doing the right thing.
Absolutely. Your favorite fashion program?
My favorite fashion program, it has to be Close 3D at the moment, if that's what. Yeah.
I meant favorite fashion academic program at LCF.
No. Oh no, you can't make me choose. You cannot make me.
But if you had to choose,
if I have to choose, it will have to be fashion jewelry, because when I know it's not clothing. And the reason why I chose fashion jewelry is because when I first arrived, it had 6 students on the course. It's now got about 80 students on the course, and it's grown massively. And what I love about the fashion jewelry course is that they're not designing engagement rings, wedding rings. They're designing fashion jewelry. They're designing jewelry that works with the body. And the materials that they use they don't use precious gemstones. They don't use very expensive metals, but we push them to be sustainable, found materials. They use a lot of recycled and upcycled materials. And what's also fascinating is that they use a lot of technology with in their design work. They use Rhino, and Rhino is this 3D design program where they can then export and use to 3D print their mock-ups. And that's amazing. They're able to see things done so quickly. I think in the past, jewelry is such a laborious process, and it took so long to get any sort of samples done. Now, within a few hours, they've got something. It doesn't take days, and it's absolutely fascinating to see that connection between the hardware, so the jewelry, working on the body and working with clothing, and I find that absolutely fascinating.
Digital or physical fashion design?
Well, we can't ignore physical. We can't ignore the physical, but I know digital fashion design is here to stay. We can't ignore it. We can't ignore it. I think at the moment, I think digital fashion design. But I think a lot of people will shout at me quite angrily through the podcast.
Probably.
I
Yeah.
think digital fashion design is such a leader, and it's not something that we can ignore. And I think that digital fashion design will enhance the physical fashion design. That's why I choose digital.
Best piece of advice for anyone wanting to break into the fashion industry?
Persevere with it. I think you need to persevere. It's and don't don't ever stop learning. It is an industry that spans everything from agriculture to advertising and everything in between. And that's what I find fascinating. Now, fashion doesn't just exist in a studio or in a factory. Fashion exists everywhere around us. And the great fashion designer, the great fashion marketer, the great fashion communicator will know that it doesn't just exist in one location and that it affects everybody. And there are so many people that feeds into the fashion industry. And that's, I think, is what makes it really fascinating for me. And don't ever lose that curiosity.
Thank you so much for your time, John.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join this podcast, and I've had a lot of fun today. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to click follow to keep up to date with the latest episodes. And if you like this episode, please give us a review. If you want us to feature a specific theme or guest, please give us a message at beyondform.io. I will see you very soon.